Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. My guests today are Lauren Herzer Risi, who is Project Director for the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. And a little later in the program, Mike Sfraga will join us. Mike is Director of the Global Risk and Resilience Program and also of the Polar Institute. And they'll be joining us today to discuss environmental security and polar issues facing the new Biden administration when it takes office just a couple of weeks from now. Lauren, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, John, for having me.
So I thought before we dive into some of the issues that the administration will be facing, that it would be worthwhile talking a bit about the Environmental Change and Security Program. And I'll editorialize here, and I'll tell you, even before I was worked for the Wilson Center, I knew about the program and worked with the program from time to time. And back then, the old director, Jeff DeBelco. And what I always observed is that you were ahead of the curve, that when people weren't talking about environment as a national security issue, you were. Could you talk to us a bit about the idea behind the program and how it combines these two disciplines?
Sure, yeah, and I think, we go even broader than that, looking at how the intersections between environmental change, global health, population dynamics, gender dynamics, all connect in ways that influence foreign policy, national security, global stability. A lot of this is recognizing that the environment is often not seen as playing a central role in the stability of a country and in the resilience of a community, but in fact it does play a strong role. And environmental change is one aspect of fragility that is often overlooked. And that also means that the environment can play a role in building resilience and in fostering peace between communities and states. And so, we don't want to miss out on the opportunities that the environment can play in building peace, but also the unintended consequences that can come about by not recognizing the role that environment plays in stability.
Has this become the way that people now look at the two, that there is no real separation, that you have to talk about one when you talk about the other?
About environment and conflict?
Yes, and security issues in general.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're there yet. I think it's often, the environment is often listed in a list of maybe precursors to conflict and insecurity, but it's not done so in a way where it's elevated to the point of actually really being included in policies and programs that are responding to those fragile or conflict-affected settings. So I'd say that there's more of a recognition that it needs to be included, but I don't know that we've really gotten there when it comes to actually including it in our responses.
So as we look ahead to Joe Biden taking office, what's waiting for him in the inbox in this area?
A whole host of things. Obviously climate change he's already mentioned it as one of his key priorities. I think water, will play a really important role in the role that the U.S. can play in fostering stability at home and abroad. I think we often overlook water dynamics until it's too late. And so sort of this real assessment of where the world stands in terms of water security and how we can address those issues. Food security, obviously, I think, with climate change and water scarcity and instability, I think that, food security goes hand in hand with that, as does energy. So all of these issues are interconnected. It's not possible to address one without considering the others.
How significant is the John Kerry appointment to this new role in the area of climate?
I think that it's very significant, right? It underscores President-elect Biden's recognition that foreign policy is climate policy and his eagerness to get back in the driver's seat for U.S. global leadership on climate change. He's appointed a senior statesman to lead this conversation on behalf of the U.S. And I think that says a lot about his seriousness in addressing climate change.
Now, he said that one of his top priorities, one of his initial acts, maybe even on day one, will be to re-enter the Paris Climate Agreement. It's hard to talk about where we're headed without looking at where we are or where we've been. The conventional wisdom is that there's been significant slippage during the Trump years. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we've really, there's been a vacuum on climate action at the federal level under Trump. That's not to say that there hasn't been action, right? You can look at the subnational levels, at non-state actors, at the private sector. There's been continued action on climate, and that's going to be really important for paving the way forward for US federal action on climate. But I think that the last 4 years have really held us back a significant amount. And so, Biden has indicated that joining the Paris Agreement is a priority for day one. I think, he's gone at great lengths to connect climate change to the other issues that he'll be dealing with. He's said that we're in the midst of 4 crises, a global pandemic, an economic crisis, a racial injustice crisis, and each of these crises are on their own devastating, but they're also connected, they're interconnected. And the commitments that Biden has put forth and the people he's selected to lead on climate indicate a recognition of this, that the climate response must be a cornerstone of our economic recovery from COVID-19, and that climate action needs to align with environmental justice.
Is the world waiting for the U.S. to resume a leadership position, or what will it be like as the administration attempts to reassert U.S. involvement?
I think the U.S. needs to return to a leadership role, and the world needs the U.S. to return to a leadership role. We still have the largest economy in the world. We're the second largest emitter after China. If we don't take action, we take the ship down with us. This has to be a team effort, and the only way we're going to be able to lead after the last 4 years is if that leadership is accompanied by a strong dose of humility, and it's in partnership with other countries. The EU has made consistent progress on climate. We've been sitting on the sidelines, and we haven't even been in the stadium. So successful US leadership on this issue isn't going to look the same as it has in the past. There's a lot to learn from our allies. There's a lot that's been done at the subnational level by cities and states. There's a lot that's been done by the private sector. So in our push to lead, I don't think we can underestimate the importance of cooperation on climate action.
When any new administration takes office, there are expectations attached, right? Whether those are positive, optimistic expectations or a sense of dread around certain issues. Are the expectations for the Biden administration as it relates to climate action realistic in your view, or is he walking into a situation where it's going to be tough to live up to expectations?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on who you ask, right? But since you're asking me, I think that there are very high expectations, and with a majority in the Senate and Congress, there's some momentum, at least in the short term, for climate action. But I think one of the challenges that I see ahead is, the climate denialism and the disinformation about climate change. And that's good. We're going to see that increase as the Biden administration advances climate policies. And so I think there's got to be a communication strategy as they advance policy that brings people along and that ensures that nobody's being left behind. And, another hurdle obviously is going to be our very sort of poor track record of demonstrating a commitment to our commitments and the erosion of trust we're facing in the international arena. So, and just the really ugly events that we've experienced in the last days and weeks have just further undermined the US's position on the global stage. And so I think he's got a lot of tricky navigation ahead, but climate can actually be a tool to engaging with partners at home and abroad. And so the more he can integrate it across US government policy and action and bring people on board, the better and the more successful I think his policies will be.
You've already described the interconnected nature of the issues we're talking about, the overlap, the inability to separate them out. But if you were in a position to recommend priorities to the new administration, top 2 or 3 issues that you think deserve the most attention right out of the chute, what would they be?
That's a great question. I think that the more that we can pull together and recognize the connections between environmental justice and racial justice and climate justice, and because there's so much fortitude in both those movements. And so recognizing that the communities that are most at risk of climate change are the communities of color. And so there needs to be a dynamism and a connection between these movements that can really push us forward. and in doing so, make sure, again, that we're not leaving anybody behind in this effort to move forward on climate. You know, and I think we have a big project at the Wilson Center on 21st century diplomacy, recognizing that foreign policy is climate policy. And so the purpose of that is to help those in the foreign policy community who don't normally have the environment or climate in their portfolio recognize that regardless of whether or not it's sitting on their desk right now, it will be eventually, because climate is going to affect every aspect of our lives, right? You know, we have a senior or a global fellow, Maxine Burkett at the Wilson Center, who often says that climate change is not an issue. It is the context in which we're living. And that's absolutely true. It's changing how we work. It's changing where we live. It's changing how we plan for our futures. And I think that, you know, it's more and more going to come into play for across government agencies. And so helping them recognize that and prepare is really important.
Lauren, tell us, before I let you go, tell us a little more about that initiative. Where can people get more information, whether it's people within the new administration or just the general public who's interested in, and what are we talking about? We're talking about events, publications. How is the project being communicated?
Sure. So the project, I'd say all of the above. The initial launch included 28 articles on 7 different topics related to foreign policy and climate policy, written by senior level foreign policymakers, by analysts, by researchers, by journalists. Looking at, I won't go into the 7 topics here, but you can go to, I think it's diplomacy21-adelphi.wilsoncenter.org. Maybe we can put that link up.
Yeah, we'll put that on the screen for our viewers as well.
And as well, some podcast interviews, some events. We'll be continuing to publish more articles, because all of this is obviously evolving. And so we need to be keeping track of the trends and looking ahead, and maybe revisiting the topics that we're addressing to see if we should be expanding them as well.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us, and continued success in the new year.
Thank you so much, John.
Okay, Lauren, take care. Next up, we're going to, I previewed that Mike Sfraga would be joining us. Mike is the director of the Global Risk and Resilience Program, under which the Environmental Change and Security Program that Lauren directs is part of that operation. But Mike also began as our specialist on the Arctic and the Antarctic, and the Polar Institute has become quite a significant player in DC discussions about the poles. Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
So you just heard the discussion with Lauren, and I said to her in the first question I asked about how ECSP has been ahead of the curve, and that has been talking about the integration or the overlap between security issues and environmental issues for a long, long time now. Similarly, when I first met you, you were one of the few people around who were really talking about the emergence of the Arctic at the time when we first met as a major looming issue. And now every day that prophecy seems to be coming true. Tell us about that. And what does the new administration need to know about what's happening in the Arctic?
Yeah, thank you. First, let me just thank Lauren for setting a great context. You know, every time I speak to Lauren, I learn something, and then listening to that discussion really reinforces the work that we do across all of the programs of the Global Risk and Resilience Program, Polar being one of them. So yes, when we first met, we talked about the Arctic, but for decades, there have been people like me throughout the world who've been talking about the looming issue of the Arctic, talking about the emerging Arctic, and then now it's emerged. It is now part of the international context for almost every issue you would like to talk about. So it has become no longer, it's not a boutique issue, it's become a central issue, whether it's domestic or foreign policy. Whether you're interested in commerce or security, you're going to talk about the Arctic for a lot of reasons. Unfortunately, the issues that Lauren was talking about, climate change, is the principal driver for a lot of the Arctic and Antarctic related issues that we cover. In terms of the Biden administration, along with a long list of issues that they must address, everyone thinks their issue is the most important, but this really is. The Arctic is one of those that should be on that important list, because it is now a region of the world that's in the nation's best interest to not only know about, but to be actively engaged in. So this administration is going to have to reinforce, as Lauren has said, US leadership, whether that's on climate issues or commerce issues, but really reinstilling with our friends, allies, and partners the rules, the international rules of engagement, the very components and the frameworks under which we have functioned in the Arctic are still there. They will be growing and being stressed as the Arctic changes, but they will have to address the rule of law and internationalism and the importance of multilateral relationships. So there must be leadership from the United States in those areas. And we can go through a whole list of areas where I think the U.S. should be leading, but it is the re-engagement of the United States, the leadership of the United States, and the reaffirmation that the Arctic is an important region, as it is to many of our friends around the globe.
And where are we starting from in that regard, Mike? Are we in the center of these discussions? Are we already in a leadership position, or is this an opportunity to be taken?
Well, it's been interesting. It is waxed and waned. The United States has been an active member in the Arctic Council, the preeminent body, since its inception. We have played a central role in that organization and continue to. However, our position has changed quite a bit under the Trump administration. And we see that, take any of the issues that have come out of the administration and just overlap that onto an Arctic context. So very much discussions about great power competition and rivalries and disengagement from the Paris Accord and climate agreements. All of those issues are central to the Arctic Council and central to what has been a framework and a context for Arctic discussions. We have seen the United States retrench from those as we have retrenched from multilateral relationships and gone to this bilateral relationship. But we have had a central role. Under the Biden administration, I fully expect the United States to lean further forward in our leadership role, not just in the Arctic Council, but in all of these discussions related to the Arctic and the Antarctic, because climate is a major driver. So I see a re-engagement, although we have been engaged, but I think we will lean forward on a full portfolio of issues related to the Arctic, not just those related to national security or economic development or oil and gas development. I think it'll go a full context of issues like our partners have been talking about for the last 20-something years.
Is there any indication that the Biden administration will give a special focus to the poles beyond the climate question? For example, I know there's a need for infrastructure to be built within the Arctic region, whether that be new ice cutters or whether that be broadband access. Do you have any indication that there will be a focus there and an investment there?
I do. I have every expectation that the Biden administration will take a far broader view of the Arctic. Again, not just national security, although there are real issues that the United States needs to address in that area with our partners and our allies. But this administration, if we're talking about building back better, the Arctic would be a good place to be involved in that build back better. And I would say that the United States needs infrastructure here in my home state of Alaska, whether that's telecommunications to support communities, but also to support our homeland security, our U.S. Coast Guard missions, our DoD missions. So there's a portfolio of issues that the United States must address, and Arctic telecommunications and infrastructure is one of those. We know we do not have a deep water port in America's Arctic, not one. So as the Arctic continues to open, we need that, and that's been a long discussion. I sense that there will be movement on both of those fronts in this administration. I would recommend that things like a deep water port and infrastructure do occur in America's Arctic. It's in our best interest. I think the Biden administration will take a far broader aperture in terms of the Arctic across all portfolios. Listen to what Lauren just said about Secretary Kerry and his role, but also the president's decision to create a position for Gina McCarthy as the domestic czar for climate. So internationally, climate change will be raised in the U.S.'s perspective, but also domestically. Well, the Arctic fits into both of those buckets. And so I see that the administration, its filter will not just be climate change, but it permeates everything related to the Arctic, because that's the principal driver. So I see the Arctic being raised in this administration to a level perhaps we had not seen before, but also to be spread across many of the federal agencies and missions of the United States federal government.
On the security front, what do we need to know? I know that Russia has built some new military installations. Are we really talking about a region that could become a source of conflict?
I do not believe that the Arctic will be the source of the conflict. If there's a conflict in the Arctic, it will most likely be the result of either a miscommunication, a misinterpretation, or an accident. And those three things keep people up at night. I think if there is action in the Arctic, it will be because of something else elsewhere. You and I have talked about just a few years ago, if you were in an Arctic meeting, you were basically talking about the Arctic. I have been in meetings now where you hear issues related to Crimea, Ukraine, Syria, the Baltics. All of these issues now are woven into an Arctic narrative because the world is interconnected and the Arctic has opened. There is a new ocean opening before our eyes. So I don't think it's going to happen in the Arctic. I think what the United States needs to do, and in fact, give credit to the US Air Force, the United States Coast Guard, the Navy just released an Arctic blueprint. So 3 of our branches have Arctic strategies. The Army is working on theirs right now. We expect a Coast Guard implementation plan here soon. So the branches of our military understand fully that this environment you have to operate in and be prepared for. Yes, we have to be forward-leaning. Those should be offensive when needed, but mostly defensive in response to, not just to Russia. And the Russian government has certainly built new bases and has revitalized old Soviet era bases. It's not solely for offensive. They have economic interests along the Northern Sea route in the Arctic to protect their own interests, but we should not be Pollyanna about this. We should be diligent and vigilant. And then there are other actors out there that may want to influence the Arctic region. We need to be diligent and vigilant there.
About those other actors, Mike, who are the main players beyond the obvious, the Arctic nations themselves? Who are the other global powers or mid-level powers that have interests in the region?
Yeah, many powers have different interests. For instance, Japan has a significant interest in the Arctic, in oceans, in fisheries, significant research portfolio on the Arctic, and they're very much in tune. China has significant interests in the Arctic, and you hear China a lot about the Arctic, mostly through their Belt and Road Initiative and the concern about their investments in the Arctic and how that might influence the region, as it has in other parts of the world, like Africa. So China would like to play a more prominent role in shaping policy in the Arctic. They will tell you publicly that it's to engage with the broader Arctic community and the broader international community. There are questions about the motive behind investments in the Arctic and elsewhere in the world, so we should be cognizant of that. There are other nations, the European Union, there are governments and nations in Europe that are interested in the Arctic. So you wouldn't think that Singapore would be interested in the Arctic, but they are, because they are a maritime nation. So you see that even if you don't have a direct link to the Arctic, there are issues related to the Arctic, like economic development, like fisheries, like blue ocean economy, like ocean acidification. You can go through a long list. It's not just about the military components, where nations actually have equities in the Arctic.
A final thought, Mike, I want to give you an opportunity for a plug. And, one of the beauties of the Wilson Center doing plugs is we can be shameless. Since we're not selling it, we're giving it away, right? This is in the public interest. So resources, upcoming initiatives and projects that people should know about for the Polar Institute.
Actually, we just did an analysis. We have over 120 different sessions and 60 different programs over the last 3+ years. The big ones for us over the next year or so will be a focus on Arctic security dialogues with our friends at the Arctic Domain Awareness Center in Anchorage. So we'll focus on Arctic security, but not just hard security. This is civil security issues as well: search and rescue, food security, fisheries, things like that. We will refocus again on Greenland and Greenland's specific geopolitical importance, but also the government of Greenland and working with the Kingdom of Denmark. There will be a number of security-related issues, water security in particular. Climate will be a major part of our portfolio as well. And infrastructure. We'll talk a lot about economic development and infrastructure throughout the Arctic. And again, climate will be the principal driver, but we'll also talk about communities in the Arctic and the impacts that climate and other issues are having on these communities in the north. So we're trying to take a more holistic approach, and you'll hear more from us about this arc of cooperation in the Arctic, from Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, our Nordic colleagues, right into Europe. So there's an Arctic arc of cooperation. Many of these issues you just cannot separate. So to be full portfolio reflecting the issues of the Arctic, not just one in particular.
Great. We look forward to hearing more about it, Mike. Thanks for joining us today. As I said to Lauren, I want to wish you good luck in the coming year, and thanks to you and Lauren for being here.
Thank you, John.
We hope that you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now, and that you'll join us again soon for another episode. Until then, for all of us at the Wilson Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for being here.